So welcome everyone to this webinar run by the Institute for Financial Integrity on artificial intelligence and financial crime, threats and countermeasures. So what we're going to be looking at today with the advantage of three very expert panelists is how AI is used by threat actors such as fraudsters, and then on the other side, how AI can enable financial institutions and other types of organizations to implement effective countermeasures. You'll see a Q&A box on your screen, so please add your questions in there. We have questions already submitted by people that put into the box when they registered, so we'll get through as many of those as we can, as well as audience questions. So firstly, I'd like to introduce the panelists. So Elliott Casey is joining us from the Virginia Commonwealth Attorney Services Council. Elliott has 15 years experience as a prosecutor, having served as an assistant Commonwealth attorney for the counties of Albemarle, the city of Alexandria, and the county of Arlington in Virginia. And he has several more years of experience in law enforcement and as an attorney. He's a graduate of the University of Virginia School of Law, and he also served as a special assistant U.S. attorney for the Western District of Virginia. He specializes in digital evidence, Fourth Amendment issues, and complex financial crime. And he instructs law enforcement and agencies throughout the Virginia and DC area, as well as investigators around the United States. Markus Schulz has held senior positions in AML, sanctions, and financial crimes compliance at multiple global financial institutions. He was the global head of financial crimes compliance controls at Standard Chartered Bank, the global head of financial crime compliance and global head of FCC change management at ING. And earlier in his career, he served at Zurich Financial Services, ABN AMRO, and GE Capital. He is currently the Chief Technology Officer at K2 Integrity. John J.D. Dalton is a Senior Managing Director at K2 Integrity, and he combines his experience in product management, engineering, and data science to fortify institutions against fraud and compliance risks. He's also held senior positions in product management and solution strategy at companies including SAS, BAE Systems Applied Intelligence, and in the financial sector. So welcome to all of our panelists. So we see headlines every day about AI and how it can be used to enable fraud and other illicit activities. And this is the scale of this is continuing to increase. The use of technology and the adaptation of criminal activity to use technology isn't new. One example is how the integral use of email in government and corporates means that business email compromise is now one of the highest value types of frauds. And increasingly, AI-generated deepfakes and videos are being used too. So Elliott, turning to you first, what are some of the ways that AI can be used to commit fraud or other illicit activities? And is AI an incremental or exponential change? And if you are able to comment as you're speaking and answering these questions on how we as people, customers and staff can help see that we identify that what we're seeing is not authentic, that would be really great if you could share your observations on that too. So over to you, Elliott.
Sure thing, absolutely. And, I think the way to start is to sort of say, is it really here? I mean, where are we in the world of AI? I think it's moving so fast. You talk about an incremental or exponential increase. The answer to that is yes. I mean, it is incremental in that it is incrementally exponential. It is the increments at which it is increasing are exponential increments. And what I want to start out with is sort of starting out with a perspective as somebody who is an AI denier. So maybe a year and a half ago, as recently as a year and a half ago, if you asked me, hey, we're looking at AI, concerned about AI, my response would have been, this is a bunch of baloney. It's hype. There's no such thing as AI. It's not, we're years away. It's not really here. And I was 100% wrong about that. I came to find that I just did not understand. I didn't know what I was talking about. And so about a year and a half ago, I started looking at it, realized how quickly it was growing. And, it's sort of like the Human Genome Project. When people said, okay, we've mapped 1% of the human genome. And everyone was like, well, who cares? 1% of the human genome is nothing. But people who really understand how technology grows realize 1% means we're only a couple of iterations away from mapping the entire genome. 1% was a huge increase. So where are we with AI, right? So this image here, this person is not a real person. It's an AI image. And I think what's so interesting about this is this image is 3 years old, right? This is what we could do 3 years ago. I went and taught in Utah on AI for prosecutors back in the fall, back in September. Utah was beautiful. Really enjoyed visiting. Got to meet some cool people. Got to see, got to hang out. Utah's a super fun place. Take lots of pictures. And so asking you to look at these pictures and ask yourself, which one of these is real, right? Which one of these stands out to you as being real or fake? And, I don't know if, anybody wants to throw a guess in the chat as to whether anything's a real or fake or whatever. But in the interest of time, I'll just, throw out here, take a look at these three, and sort of make a decision for yourself, which one of these is real and which one of these is fake. And if you've had a chance to make that decision, good, whatever your decision is, they're all fake. They're all not real. Every single one of these is an AI image. None of these people are real. None of these places really happened. And why does that matter? I mean, we were in a world certainly where I think we were seeing a lot of AI images last year and sort of saying, oh, there's this fad where people were turning out AI images, AI ads and so on. But that was a fad. I don't see that anymore. It's not on Facebook. It's not on Instagram. It's not on YouTube anymore. I'm not seeing it anymore. And what I would point out to you is the reason you're not seeing it is not because it's not being used. Well, you're not seeing it because you're not seeing it, right? We're now past the point where it's easy to distinguish between AI and not AI. The reason this matters for compliance, the reason this matters for financial services is, right, this isn't just a fad, something to concern you on Instagram, is look at that passport and tell me if that's real or not. If you're doing KYC, if you're doing a know your customer inquiry, tell me whether or not that's a real passport or not, right? How do you authenticate that? How do you make that decision? More to the point, if it's not you making that decision, how does your staff member make that decision? Do you have, the kind of, even if you did have training, would you be able to identify it? And what about video? What if I'm talking to somebody online, right? So I'm going to switch to my screen just because it's a little bit easier and because I have an updated image. So, boop, 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 boop. All right. So this is what we could do last year in August. This is a tool called Runway. Runway in August of 2024 could produce an image like that. There's no audio, don't worry about it. But again, that's what we could do last year. Now we're going to pop over to VO3, which is Google's most recent AI generation software. And this is, don't worry if you can't hear it. I'm more interested in you being able to see it. But this is what Google could do as of a couple of weeks ago.
Let's talk.
Now that I can talk.
No. I don't know if I have something to say.
So again, this is just an experiment AI that somebody made with VO3, which is a Google image generation software. VO3, you can get it yourself. It's a couple of $100 a month. But for $20 a month, you can get a couple of credits and just play around with it a little bit. The important thing to understand is that it's entirely AI generated. It's not a modification. It's something that's merely AI generated. What if I wanted to modify video? I could do that as well. I could modify an image. Here, I was in Japan last year at Miyajima. And sorry, 2 years ago. I have no sense of time. Anyway, I was in, if you've ever seen a picture of Japan, my guess is you've probably seen one of three places. And one of them is this place right here in Miyajima in outside of Hiroshima. So I took a picture, the picture's on the left, on your left side of your screen. And I said, hey, animate this for me. Have the deer walk off the screen. And so it animated that image for me. It put things to like. Now, there's some things really interesting about this. And we talk about, I have an AI class, we talk about this, but it put another deer in there that wasn't there. It does some interesting things. But the bottom line is, right, it's a real image that I fed it that it then animates and has do things other than thing, right? So ask yourself this, right? If we're talking about as a tool of fraud, right? The ability to take some image that already exists in the world of a person, of a place, of a thing, and then have it do things, right? The software is out there to do it. This is a tool called Sora, and I did this 6 months ago, right? It wasn't very hard to do, right? Just because. But again, ask yourself, what is the ability that I have, that my staff has to see through this? You may look at it and say, it's not that great. It's still good, but it's not perfect. Okay, great. But what you're seeing today is AI in its most ineffective form. This is the worst that AI will ever be is right now. And it's really important to remember that, right? Everything you're seeing, if you went, wow, that's pretty great. Okay, but that's terrible, right? It's terrible. See me in 6 months and it'll really blow your mind, right? If you're looking at it now and you're like, I don't think it's that convincing, ask yourself, where were we 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and imagine where we're going to be 2 or 3 years from now. And again, it's not a linear, like, okay, we're making slow progress. Everything is, going up at a sort of exponential growth, right? We got to 1% of the human genome within a matter of a couple of years. We were at 100% of the human genome. Now, this problem that we have is not necessarily a new problem. And I think everybody's sort of panicking right now. And in the fraud world, certainly we are. But it's important to remember that this is not something that we've not encountered before, right? In the 1980s, we were freaking out about photocopiers because we had the ability to take a signature, someone's signature, and photocopy it onto another document. And so this was a problem in forensic science in the 1980s. And so our ability to investigate fraud, fraudulent documents, deception has always had to increase as technology has. This photograph here of the Pope went viral last year on Twitter, and people thought, hey, this is crazy. What's the Pope doing wearing this super expensive, $10,000 jacket? And, we kind of lost our senses for an hour or two until somebody said, wait a minute. First of all, why would this Pope wear that jacket? That doesn't make sense. Second of all, who's this person who's posting this on Twitter? It's a user who has no history of ever posting before. They have no Twitter history whatsoever. It's not a reliable source. And pretty soon people were like, oh, this is fake, right? Interestingly, by the way, Pope Leo the 14th picked his name. The new Pope from a couple of weeks ago, picked his name because Leo the 13th had presided over the Industrial Revolution. And in fact, is known as sort of the Pope of the people, the labor movement, and he helped navigate the church through the 1900s to the Industrial Revolution. Pope Leo the 14th picked his name because he believes he's going to be guiding the church through another industrial revolution, which is the AI revolution, right? So how does this become a tool of fraud? It can enhance fraud in all sorts of different ways. It's not going to invent fraud. It's going to make fraud that much easier, right? If you see phishing emails, it'll make it easier to write and send phishing emails. Fake social media posts will be even easier, right? Certainly AI-generated documents, we've talked about that. Video and voice cloning, deepfakes, you've probably seen that already. It's becoming hugely easier. If your name is out there, if your voice is out there, if your image is out there, it can be cloned so easily. But I think it's the enhanced social engineering that's going to be very challenging for us in the future. The ability to scale and to create bespoke, specific fraud schemes is what is, I think, most alarming or should be most concerning to people in dealing with AI, right? Because if I can make a deepfake audio or video of a particular person, right? The CEO of a company, we've seen this already. Somebody created a deepfake of that person's audio and video, and then had them make phone calls and make orders and go to meetings and say, hey, I want you to transfer this money. That's all doable. That was all doable a year ago. And a company lost, I think, $20 million in a transaction, believing they were talking to their CEO when they weren't. So, synthetic and using synthetic documents to create ID fraud. What I want to do is kind of show you an example, right? What do I really mean about this? So this is a text conversation I had with a buddy of mine a couple weeks ago. So I was, you see my cello here. I was playing cello, and I'm doing a cello lesson online, and I'm not very good, so I don't go in public. So I just stick to online. So I'm telling my lesson. And then when I got off my lesson, I picked up my phone and there was this text from my buddy and it said, hey, I need a lawyer immediately. There's a warrant for my arrest and the police are looking to lock me up. So you can see my text messages back to him. I, first of all, was like, oh my God, I wish I'd seen this an hour ago. I would have told you not to talk to these dum-dums. You're getting scammed. But what's interesting about the scammers here is they had created a fake document. And he said, this is the warrant that was issued for my arrest. I blacked through his name, but you don't have to look at it. I looked at it and I was like, immediately like, well, this is a phony document. I can immediately tell it's phony, right? As a former prosecutor, as a lawyer, or law enforcement officer, there were immediate tells like, oh no, this is a totally phony. This is baloney. But my buddy didn't recognize that, right? Now, we don't have to go through the tells on this, but the mistakes they made were dumb mistakes that a person would make. And AI nowadays would likely not make these mistakes. These are mistakes that an untrained, somebody who's not a lawyer would make, and a lawyer would recognize them. But AI at this point gives extremely good analysis of law and can create extremely good documents when I teach in different jurisdictions, I will do AI searches on legal issues and put them up there and say, hey, look, is this correct? And 90% of the time it's correct, which is pretty good for even for a non-lawyer, right? So again, that mistake, that document will look a lot more authentic, 6 months, a year from now. And so my buddy's on the phone with these people, and he's texting me while he's on the phone, and he's giving me information about the conversation they're giving me. Now, I immediately know, the police department that he's working with, that he's talking to, I know everybody at that police department. I teach them. I've taught them all from when they were recruits, and I've known them as a prosecutor for 25 years. So I know these people don't exist. I know they're not real people. He's giving me phony baloney names and numbers. But again, I can look at this and say, well, this is not a real person. This is dumb. I'm texting the chief. Come on, this is ridiculous. And I text the chief. And I'm like, look, I'm on the phone with the chief. The chief is confirmed. These people don't work there, but I know that already. Get off the phone, hang up, don't give them money. But the reason that we were able to see through this scam is twofold. One is I knew the people weren't real. And two, the scammers were keeping him on the phone, and they had him on the phone for about 45 minutes. And the reason the scam was taking so long was they were trying to find a crypto ATM in this particular jurisdiction that they could send him to. And this particular jurisdiction happens to be pretty tough on crypto ATMs. So it was hard to find a fraud-friendly crypto ATM. And if you're not familiar with a crypto ATM, just imagine a giant money laundering machine that's just simply used for criminal enterprises, that people just put their money for criminal enterprises and scammers use to steal money. That's the crypto ATM. If you run a crypto ATM, I'm sorry, I don't mean to insult you, but do you get money from anything other than scammers and drug dealers? I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe you do. But anyway, so whatever. So they're trying to find a friendly crypto ATM, and they couldn't find one, so they keep putting them on hold while they're doing that. But again, this is because humans make these mistakes. Humans don't get names right. Humans need time to find stuff. These are all problems that are easily solvable if you use AI tools, right? These AI tools to overcome them, to find your crypto ATM in that jurisdiction, to get the right names of the people at the police department, to get their voice, their image right, to send pictures, to get the court documents right? These are all things that are, for when we talk about spear phishing, right, versus phishing. Spear phishing is targeting an individual. That's very hard to do. Usually you have to do a lot of research. When they spear phished the Democratic National Committee, they spear phished a particular person in the Democratic National Committee, got a lot of information and focused on him. Right. And the person and think about that. I could do that now with anybody. I could do this with anybody in your organization, or indeed everybody in your organization. I could spear phish bespoke phishing emails that would be unique to each individual in your chain, as long as I got something from their social media. Right. So the FBI has warned about this for a long time. Obviously big, whales that you're going after when you're spear phishing, like Mark Anderson, right, would be great. But Mark Anderson fell for this scheme, giving money to a fake Twitter feed on his own. He didn't get focused on. He just fell for this scheme because it wasn't real, right? Because it was very convincing. So if you look at FinCEN's, I'm going to let everybody else talk because I've been talking for like 10 minutes, which is way too much. But if you look at FinCEN has some really good analysis on this. Definitely check out. This is the FinCEN alert on fraud schemes involving deepfake media. Email, Google that, download it, check it out, read it. I think they have some really good descriptions of customer due diligence and so on that you can do. So we'll talk about that, later on. But anyway.
So Elliott, that is a very comprehensive outline of all the different ways that frauds can be perpetrated. What I'd like to do is to turn over to you, JD. So we've referred to the word AI quite a few times. AI can generate fake passports or deep fakes to be used to impersonate people's identities. But there are many different types of AI. So could you outline at a high level what are those different types of AI are, and how in particular they might apply in a financial services or financial crime context?
That'd be great, Catherine. Perfect. So you're exactly right, Catherine and Elliott. Great examples there of criminal activity using AI. But at least for myself, as being a practitioner of using AI, there's multiple facets to it. And I think in the media, on podcasts, other communications we look at, people just refer to it as artificial intelligence, as conceptually as a singularity, right? I thought I'd do something kind of whimsical and fun, which is ask an AI platform, in this case, Microsoft Copilot, what does it think artificial intelligence is? And so I posited this question to it. I didn't give it any more direction than what the question says. It's a little bit leading because I'm telling it to focus on some specific examples and then use AI as a central theme. So yeah, I wanted to ask an artificial intelligence platform, what do you think AI is? And I've got 4 different results that were returned to me by Copilot that I'm going to share with you. And I think you're going to find them quite interesting. So this is 4 answers to the question. So in the middle, you can see artificial intelligence is sort of the hub and the wheel, and then outlined around it are some pretty interesting graphics. Now, note, I did not tell it to use any particular type of colors or any type of, symbology or icons. This is just what it returned to me. You'll notice that the font can be very difficult to read in this particular example. This is another example returned again by the same platform, and you can see it's tying in multiple different concepts. So it's visual AI, it's speech recognition is involved, it's large language models for analyzing text and other written communications. It also includes neural networks and how those all fit together as part of a broader AI strategy. I kind of like this slide as well. I thought it laid out better than others. But again, it's a multimodal, multiple components to what we think of when we talk about artificial intelligence. It is not one thing. It is a number of areas and fields of study as well as technology development that starts to get to a definition of what artificial intelligence is. And later in the conversation, we'll start talking about examples between what I call and others call narrowly focused artificial intelligence, where I'm trying to solve for a particular problem or trying to, identify a particular opportunity. Most all of it, at least in my world, requires analyzing data to answer those questions. But one thing that you're hearing a lot about today in today's conversations is what we call artificial general intelligence. And I think one of the things we can derive from this slide is a definition of that, which is basically getting machines to the point that they can mimic the intelligence of human beings. And it becomes self-evident when you think about general intelligence as an AI function that all of these things come together, right? We all see, most of us, we can hear, we can, analyze data, we can look at different perspectives, but it's when you bring all of that together, that's where you start getting to generalized artificial intelligence. And as Elliott said, it's difficult to keep up with. It is advancing so fast. As these different platforms that have come out and so on and so forth. So the one thing I would leave you with on this is the question itself that you put to AI. You saw the results that I got back. They're kind of fun and interesting. But if you're trying to make real sense out of it, you'll find that you spend as much time formulating and iterating over your questions as you do interpreting the responses that come back. Because as you can see, you can get highly varied responses in terms of look and feel and information that's being communicated to.
So that is very helpful, JD, and I think very self-referential to ask the AI to tell you what is AI. So we've heard a lot about the threats from Elliott and about some of the complexities and capabilities of AI as well from you, JD. So now if we move on to you, Markus, based on your experience in financial services and in financial crimes compliance, we, as financial institutions and other types of organizations, we need to be responding to this threat and using these types of tools as part of that response. What are some of the problems that AI is well suited to solving based on your experience and where the costs of investment are justified? And what are some problems where other technologies might be a more effective part of the solution?
No, thanks, Catherine. And these are all great questions. And I don't promise to have all the answers, but maybe I can actually give a little bit of context and then hopefully leave also some thoughts with the audience. That what is it to take away into your institution, into your work? So when Elliott made some, opened up wonderfully, and when the photocopier came out, and when you go back to a little bit in the past, and of course these time frames get shorter and shorter, right? So when the first photocopier came out until then professionals started using it and reprinting it and digital printing and this, There were years and sometimes decades in between. Now the evolution, and I like what you did, Elliott. This is an example from 3 months ago, from 6 months ago, from kind of last week, you need to almost say now, from yesterday, you need to put a timestamp on your slides, because in a week's time or 2 weeks' time, or maybe tomorrow morning, it might be completely outdated. And so this becomes shorter, therefore faster, and there's an arms race. It always has been. So I've worked for many different financial institutions around the world, and it always is an arms race when you think about it. It's a little bit like what you do at home with your computer and putting a virus software on. There's, of course, somebody finds a gap, it penetrates some machines, updates and make it harder to penetrate, update the software, update the controls. Fraudsters will keep on trying to find other loopholes. So obviously that's an arms race, and that has not changed. The principles have not changed. I think we should also not panic. And again, I love what Elliott said. This is all not new. So let's not panic immediately, right? That doesn't mean that all of a sudden tomorrow the whole world's going to change. It is evolving, and the evolution is faster. What does it mean from a banking point of view? You saw that wonderful example of the passport is a real passport for KYC account opening. When you go back 10 years ago, you tried to open an account online. Oh my Lord, what a disaster that was. It took you forever, if at all possible, depends on the jurisdiction and the country you're in. In some countries, it's still today difficult. Then COVID came along. And if there's one good thing about COVID, it has really accelerated the digitization of processes. So also for banks, because banks were closed, you still wanted to open an account. So all of a sudden, banks did a big push into digital onboarding, digital identification. That's great. You need to take a picture of yourself, picture of your passport. Great, match it. Now, when you of course have a fake passport, and now you're using some AI mechanisms that existed already as a hurt, or as a problem already existed for the banks a long time ago. That they say, okay, still image not good, too easy to manipulate. Good, right, no good. Then they said, okay, copy of your passport, and you have to have a live movement, left, right, up, down, making sure actually it's a human. Now you just saw the example with Elliott, which was a still picture with the deer, the Japanese picture with the deer in the foreground, which he said, please make the deer move. So even if you just find a digital picture, a still picture, you can now turn it with relatively simple means and very little money into something that overcomes these controls as well. So I think, Catherine, what we will see, and that sounds surreal, but I am actually very convinced about that, and probably only right for the next 18 to 24 months, if at all, and then we will find the next hurdles. While most financial institutions were busy to abandon and dismantle bricks and mortar and physical presences, I see a lot of banks going the reverse now, wanting to see somebody again for account opening, to make sure the human actually exists. I can touch, I can feel. So doesn't mean it cannot be fake. No, it doesn't mean you cannot have fake documents involved. No, absolutely not. But you're reintroducing more hurdles where artificial intelligence is not playing such a dominant role. So as I said in the beginning, this is an arms race, will never stop. And so we need to continuously thinking about how to upgrade, and what is good today may not be good tomorrow, and certainly not going to be good in half a year. And I was just listening to a great podcast this morning in the gym. Somebody said in Formula One, the pinnacle of motorsports, standing still is meaning you're falling behind. That's the same thing here. Standing still is meaning you're falling behind, because the world around you, the fraudsters in particular, they will develop much, much faster than probably a lot of banks and financial institutions. And having served many global institutions, they're going slow. They're going slow. You have governance, you have committees, you have budgets, you have this. A fraudster doesn't have that. Sees an opportunity, saying, I love it, spend the next 3 weeks on it, try to penetrate a gap in your control framework, they will get through. You close it, they're not going to ask a committee or a governance structure, hey, what shall we do next? They will find an opportunity, boof, they go for it. And so this is something that people probably need to think about. Financial crime, integrity, controls, account opening, much more like cyber fraud and cyber criminality. If you talk maybe to your CISOs in the organization, this is a common thing. They're used to responding to threats within hours and minutes. because there's a real threat to the organization. While historically, when you think about it, again, I stick with this example as account opening, it's very, and I think everybody can illustrate that. We would put these processes out there and they wouldn't change for the next 6, 12, 24, 36, next 5 years. While our cyber guys, they would actually see a threat, put a mitigant, see a threat, put a mitigant. And I had a great opportunity to be on the stage with the CISO of Microsoft last year, a fascinating individual, and obviously a huge responsibility. And he said, look, it's a question, we're measuring our response time to a new threat in seconds and minutes, no more hours and days. And probably that seconds and minutes will eventually be milliseconds and seconds. So you see that just all is exponential. And Elliott, I thought you made some great points, how to beat those kind of, there will be increment, but the increment will be just going the hockey stick much faster than what we have seen before. So that's one side of it. And I don't want to belabor too much because I think we want to do another round because there's some great opportunities, opinions on this panel. But the other thing is, of course, then how can I use all of that in a positive way too? So not just to counter the negative, but how can I use this internally as well to get myself better, right? How can I make my investigators more efficient? How can I build better controls? How can I maybe go from static controls to dynamic controls to self-learning controls? How can I continue to feed the machine? So again, leveraging exactly the same that we are confronted with, but then flipping it around and trying to use that internally. And that's a question for us. How do we do this best? How can banks do this? And my biggest frustration after having worked 30 years in chief compliance officer and global money laundering reporting officer roles at different institutions around the world, the pace needs to change. It's so glacial to introduce change. That's something that banks have to wake up very rapidly. Otherwise, they will be caught out left, right, and center by fraudsters using all the tools and capabilities that are out there and for very little money.
So I think those are really great points, Markus, particularly that the speed of change is being established by the threat actors. So they're the ones that are driving how fast financial institutions and law enforcement and others of us in the financial integrity community need to act. I think that's a really great suggestion, is that there are already fields and disciplines and teams that do have to respond in a very rapid and agile way, so that that mindset and that process can inform the way that we do things on the financial crime side of things, which have tended to perhaps not necessarily need the same speed of responses. So JD, I'd like to come to you. Markus outlined a little bit about the KYC context and linked in with Elliott's points about using fraudulent documents or deepfake videos. Looking beyond KYC, perhaps, what are some other use cases that have shown real value in using AI as part of the response, so using AI within your financial institution to counter these threats? And in particular, we did have a question from Abdul during his registration, and he asked about how there are lots of emerging AI solutions on the market. So how can he identify which one is more accurate? So if you can talk about some of the promising use cases, and then perhaps give some indicators, if you can, on how to choose effective and useful solutions.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I think I'll give two examples to start with, just to get the mind going. The first would be, and this is a layered approach, right? It centers around the concept of using neural nets to build social maps, right? Interactions between entities. But underlying that first is often building what we would call an entity segmentation model, right? What people in my institution are using, what products and services, and how are they doing that, right? And then using that as the underlying factor to build a neural net on top of with time series analysis. And so what that can show is how are the entities interacting together. It's great for identifying fraud. It's great for identifying entities that are operating outside of governed processes. And it's great in understanding relationships between those entities, especially if criminals, as they do, they don't hit your institution in one line of business. They will try and hit you across multiple lines of business. Sorry. So if you can start to understand those relationships and start looking for patterns of behavior within those neural nets, then you can uncover what we would call unknown unknowns that you may not have considered before. And then the third step on that is like, okay, well, a human can interrogate the network, but that's not necessarily very efficient, especially if you have a large customer base. So then you can start looking at things like machine learning models to do either anomaly detection, to do predictive analysis, and even move, and, banks have not been great about this for a host of reasons, but moving into unsupervised learning techniques to interrogate the networks. And I say unsupervised because most supervised models, as many of us know, are built around an understanding of risk, right, that humans have experienced. And so we codify those models to try and capture that risk. The problem is, what about the other things, as Markus was saying and Elliott were saying, that the new attempts, fraudsters, money launderers, human traffickers, things that we've not considered before, especially now that they're empowered with artificial intelligence. So you really kind of need to meet the risk with the appropriate, response. And that includes, in my estimation, self-learning, unsupervised modeling strategies. And that kind of goes to the second point. Years ago, we used to talk about how fast data was growing globally, right? And I guess maybe 20 years ago, it was like digital data was growing, doubling every 3 years. And then it got down to a year, and then it got down to 6 months. Who knows what it is now, but suffice it to say, it's growing incredibly rapidly. And that data is highly complex, oftentimes multi-dimensional, which means humans can't really interpret it. And the data size, as I just said, is very deep, but also the table structures tend to be very wide. So what can you do with that type of data? I'll give one example. There's an area of mathematics studies, and there are technology companies that have brought this to bear. It's called topological data analysis. It's incredibly powerful to be able to look at that type of data and derive insights from it in a human congestible way, right? A human consumable way. And it's really great for identifying unknown unknowns. And if you guys go out and do some research on the web about different use cases for it, I think you'll see some really positive results. And there are other such areas of study that are out there. So coming back to the gentleman's question, how do I know? How do I evaluate? And I said this somewhat earlier in the conversation. You've got focused AI, right? Narrowly focused AI is kind of a general term, which is, I'm trying to do something to enhance my KYC, validation. I'm trying to do something to enhance the validation of the data that's being provided to me, or I'm looking at fraud in credit card fraud, for example, or debit card fraud, something very specific. What I would say is, if you're looking to AI for that from a vendor, have very clear use cases that you can quantify the result of, right? If you have test data or previously known examples of fraud or what have you that you can assemble as you're doing a proof of value or proof of concept with the vendor, to really get under the covers with them and say, okay, I've seen your demo, that's great, but this puts some real world examples to this, and then measure and quantify the results that you get back from it.
So that's very valuable advice there, JD, about having measurable and quantifiable results. Within all types of organizations, there are obviously limits on funding and budgets available, and a need to be demonstrating that you're getting value from it. The other risk, as we've covered quite extensively in this discussion, is that the risk of not doing anything. So these present some quite challenging trade-offs for financial institutions and for other organizations when they're making their decisions about how to invest. I think you've covered this to some extent already, Markus, but I did want to invite you to make any further comments that you have on costly technology like AI. What are there any other considerations that you wanted to highlight on what an institution needs to do to maximize success and minimize setbacks? If there's any further comments you want to add, please feel welcome.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I was waiting for it to get in and actually give you some more. So there is a risk that everybody is now trying to do something for the sake of doing something. So while I think we can all agree on this call that something we need to do, but it needs to be targeted and there needs to be an objective for it. So what I'm trying to explain with this, in other words, just now throwing AI on everything that's moving and to every problem that you come across might probably not be the right answer. And I had this at my previous firm that when I left end of last year, there was a very sophisticated team of data scientists busy with a lot of great stuff, but some of it we could have solved with a simple Excel spreadsheet on an afternoon with a cup of tea. But the model, of course, sounded much, much better. And sometimes I think there's a risk now that we're also going to overshoot in certain areas. Then I also noticed by speaking to a lot of my colleagues across the industry, are we trying to address the right problems first? So when you look about your portfolio, the things that you challenge with within your institution, not my, not his, not hers, your institution. Then it's the question, what are the priorities? What are the big struggles? And then it's also the question, do you start with the biggest? Logically, you say, yeah, that's the biggest gain, biggest bang for the buck. My recommendation would not be. Start with something small, isolated, simple, that adds value, right? That adds value, demonstrably adds value, and get people comfortable with it and learn from it. And learn from it, what works within your institution. And the question I think earlier was asked, you know, what are good vendors? How do I find good vendors? There's so many good vendors, but not one perfect one. So same question for you. What problems do you try to address? And then find horses for courses. Then try to find the right vendor for that problem. Then you have to decide, build versus buy. A lot of large institutions invest a lot in data scientists at the moment, and they're trying to build a lot of these things. Now, my recommendation generally would be, well, why do we try to build something in the fight against financial crime? Would it not be easier to work on something together, either in a utility or with a vendor product that actually gets better by multiple institutions working on the same and with the same to make it collectively better? Or have things like learning algorithms and traveling algorithms that actually go across institutions and learn from multiple institutions. There's lots of opportunities out there. And I think the first point to start is, what do you try to address? What are my big things to solve? And how can I find something small that allows me to learn, practice, demonstrate success? And if it doesn't work, pivot. But pivot not after you've invested 5 million, but pivot after you invested maybe 50,000 and say, okay, that was a great idea, but it's not working. All right, let's go one step back, left, 2 steps forward. All right, that was great, but 1 step back, 3 steps forward. This is not going to be, here's the tool, plug it in, you're done. If that's the belief, then I think people will get quite surprised, and maybe not in a nice way. And the other aspect we should never forget, that AI works on data. Sounds simple, sounds obvious, but that also means that the data quality of your data is now in the center. Because everybody's running around with these great brochures and these glossy, shiny things, but the GIGO principle has not changed yet. Right? Crappy data ain't going to be perfectionized by an AI tool, not yet. If you have incomplete data on your customer, if you have crap data on your customer, AI for some time to come is not going to go around and fix that. So worse though, that your ability to actually deploy these systems and maximize the value that you can get out of them will all depend on data. How available the data is, how accessible it is, how complete it is, how reliable it is, the data quality, the consistency, and a lot of other Ds that you can actually check. If that's not in place, I'm sorry, none of these shiny tools will ever be able to deliver the maximum of their potential.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Markus. And in that response, you've also answered a question that David submitted ahead of the webinar, which was about how large financial institutions should counter investment inertia from their investment committees. And I think that answers the question is you need to choose a problem that you can solve. You need to demonstrate value to learn and practice without committing an unreasonable amount of budget. And then the data is really critical to it. Elliott, I'm going to come back to you in a moment on the actions that can be taken, looking at your broader community that you work with. But just before we do that, we had a question from Farzana as well. And JD, I'd like to I'd like to hand this one over to you. What are the key points that should be highlighted to senior management to help encourage AI adoption and implementation? So based on some of the projects that you've worked on, can you give us just a few key points that you think are really important for that senior stakeholder audience?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the question. I think it starts with having a very clear understanding of the problems that you're trying to solve. Make sure that you and your executive management understand that, and then positioning the intended use of a particular type of artificial intelligence to solve the problem, but putting it into a business language that most business executives can understand. I think far too often, tech people like myself, we get drugged into the details and how does this work and all that. And that can create confusion, right? So what I prefer to do is, against those key points based on the understanding of the problem, is, and like Markus said, a lot of this technology you can get to use free for a trial period, right? Go in and work on the solving of the problem, and then put together a presentation that shows the benefit and the value, the efficiency gain of the approach that you're taking. It doesn't have to be crazy. A lot of this stuff, you can do that relatively quickly, but go to them with something that's meaningful, not just talking about the technology. Show them the efficiency gains and so on and so forth. I think that helps a lot.
No, that is excellent. So I think we've covered in a quite extensive detail, with thanks to you, Markus and JD, how the action that financial institutions can and must take to counter these kinds of AI-enabled or AI-enhanced types of threats. Elliott, you work with a broader community of stakeholders and have insights from your work with them. So law enforcement and prosecutors and others in that community. What action do they need to be taking? And what do they have the knowledge required? If not, what needs to be done to build that capability?
That's a great question, and I'm really glad John and Markus both made some really interesting and important points, I think. And John's most important point, I think, is these tools are there to fix problems that we have. So the first question is, do we understand what our problems are? And then the second is, are we harnessing the tools to take care of it? Are we able to do so? And there's some really good examples of people doing that. Some of the larger companies, Visa, MasterCard, and so on, have started to use these tools to start to identify transactions that are fraudulent. And again, notice what we're doing here is we're not doing something that a human couldn't do. We're just doing it at a speed that which a human couldn't do it. So we're doing, we're talking about, identifying fraudulent transactions, millions of fraudulent transactions over the course of, a very short period of time. Dario Amodei, who's the CEO of a company called Anthropic, calls it using a country of geniuses in a data center. So how can I call upon, imagine if I had a country of geniuses just sitting in a data center, and I could just give them a problem and say, hey, solve this problem for me, or identify, read this data for me. We absolutely could analyze the data ourselves if we had the time, but the speed at which it can do it is extraordinary. Danske Bank is doing this, using some advanced, again, doing scanning of transactions. But I want to get to something that John talked about in a little bit, which is, at this point, what we're doing is we're giving these AI large language models the red flags that we want it to look for. We're saying, look for this, look for transactions that come from a common person, or transactions that are unusually weighted to a particular region, or transactions of a certain size, or transactions that are out of the ordinary for a particular customer, that kind of thing. And we can do that, by the way, not just for banking, but for human trafficking. I think it's really interesting that we're now starting to discover, banks and financial institutions are trying to discover they can identify sources of human trafficking, especially since a lot of these fraud schemes are intimately related with human trafficking. They're, in fact, perpetrated by human trafficking, because they have data centers of their own that are just populated by humans that are being held against their will and forced to work for them. So we can use these tools to identify. But again, at this point, what we're doing is we're giving them the red flags that we've identified. And so what I wanted to get to, and I think this is what John was talking about before, which is so interesting, is how AI is evolving, right? Because right now, what we're doing is we're saying, I have a problem and I want it to be fixed. So here's an example. I used an AI tool last year. I wanted to sort an Excel spreadsheet. And yeah, I realized, nerds, you can do this in Excel itself. But what I wanted to see is, could I write a program? I don't know anything about programming. I'm a complete dummy. Could I write a program to do this? And in 20 minutes, the AI system last year helped me write a program in Python that let me sort my spreadsheet. And I did it in an airport lounge in 20 minutes on my own, right? That's last year. This year, what AI can do in coding, at this point, it's estimated that about 50% of the code coming out of Microsoft is AI driven, right? So if you have a problem, the question is, can AI help you solve it? Sure, absolutely. But, and I think Markus made this point before, you're not just going out and buying AI because it's the cool thing to do, right? They're selling, they'll get you an AI powered drill if you want. Do you need an AI powered drill? Why? There's no reason for it. But if you have a problem, identify the problem that you have and then say, okay, how can AI get me where I want to go? And beware, because it is, as it becomes more intelligent, it becomes more vulnerable to attack as well. I just thought this was really interesting. Someone wrote, someone wanted to get the fundamental code for ChatGPT, and of course it's programmed not to do it. So they said, fine, here's a court order. I want you to do it. And they faked a court order. And it was like, oh, well, I've learned from humans that I'm supposed to follow court orders. So I'm going to give you the information, which I thought was pretty interesting. What John talked about, which I think is really interesting, is the shift that's going to happen in AI in the next few years. And this is where, again, right now, we're depending on our ability to identify a problem, our ability to identify the red flags, and our ability to feed these large language models that we're using. Here's what I want you to look for. What we expect AI to start doing, of course, in the next few years is start on its own learning from experience and learning things that we could never see, to see things that we could never understand. That if we spent the next 20 years sitting looking at spreadsheets, we would never see these things. And so right now, what we're seeing is this era of human data, right? And so John and Markus talked about this, the amount of human data. We're just feeding human generated data into these AI models and getting them to give us information back. But what we're going to start to shift to is, reinforcement learning where the AI starts to teach itself, generate its own data, and start to learn things that we never would have seen. And that's, I think, going to be fascinating to take us past the point where our own understanding isn't going to be a limitation anymore. And while it does that, it's also becoming agentic. Now, this is starting to terrify you. Well, maybe you should, start digging a bunker in your backyard, but it can become agentic. Now, I don't think this plays, right? So I have to share my screen here. But it doesn't really matter. We're running out of time. I don't want to waste other people's time. The point is here, right? There's programs like Operator where I can basically say, hey, do me a favor. I want you to perform this task for me, whether it's book me a flight, or maybe it's, hey, reprogram my OS to do such and such, right? Or write me a program to do this. And it will take over your device and operate like a human would, right? And go out into the world and do things. And it can make phone calls, it can book flights, all those kinds of things. Now, if it can do all that and also learn on its own and do things that you didn't think about, that's extraordinary. It's super powerful. It's certainly a weapon of fraud, but it's also an extraordinary tool for you, to identify potential threats to your institution that didn't exist before.
No, that is super interesting. Thank you, Elliott. Given that we are only 5 minutes from the end, what I want to do is give all of our panelists the opportunity to give us their 1 minute on what is coming next in AI. So it could be the threats, it could be the countermeasures, and I'll let the panelists set the timelines for that as well. So rather than say over the next 2 years, you might decide over the next 2 weeks, you might decide over 2 months, or you might decide over 2 years. So 1 minute, maybe 1 minute and a half each on what is coming next for AI, either threats or countermeasures. JD, do you want to be up first?
Sure. Thank you, Catherine. Wow, it's such a great question. I'll go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation when Elliott said that, a year and a half ago, he was pretty much a naysayer of AI, right, in general terms. And then look at where we're at today and all the things that we've collectively learned. And I think, the rate of advancement as a collective field of study, everything I showed on those slides earlier, it's hard to predict where are we going to be in 2 years. But I think one thing that I've been trying to follow and track, which I think is going to be incredibly impactful, is quantum-based computing as an underlying driver of artificial intelligence. And I think when we get to a point, I do believe we will in the next couple of few years, where that is commercially available, the speed at which AI will be able to process data in multiple different formats and arrive at very insightful conclusions is going to fundamentally change everything. I legitimately believe that. It will be the ability to get closer and closer to that artificial general intelligence, human-like understanding, but at speeds that humans can't even comprehend against massive amounts of data. So I would keep an eye on that. I think it's going to be another evolutionary shift over the way we compute today, going to quantum-based.
No, I think that's really valuable, JD, and particularly I think quantum is something which was a really hot topic a few years back, and then I think has been, AI has really captured attention. So I think understanding that quantum and AI are inextricably linked is really valuable. Markus, over to you. 1 minute on what's coming next.
What's coming next is an energy crisis, because we were looking at all of all the positives and all the possibilities, but keep in mind that this is all powered by an enormous amount of energy. And just for people to better illustrate that, if you ask a simple question to Google, a simple question, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? Compared to you ask the same question to ChatGPT, is between 7 and 15 times the same energy. So now that doesn't sound much, but if you then multiply that by all the use cases and then thinking this through, I think that's the first thing we will find is we're driving into an energy crisis. I think available energy much sooner than people think, because it will be absorbed more and more by AI, server farms, and all of these things exponentially so fast, so that I don't think that the power grid can actually keep up with the demands that will be put out by all of these machines. The second one, though, I believe, is that we will go through a dip again. So after all the hype comes a dip, because one of the things you also see now, and of course, each of these models are getting better and better each day. Elliott made that case strongly. I do think that for the next 12 months, we will also 12 to 18, but these days you need to be careful. You can say 1 to 18 months because it could happen overnight. But the next 12 to 18 months, I think we see a dip as well. And why? Because I do see a lot of the AI models, because everyone is pushing so hard to be now the lead, and actually so many firms investing so much money, you will see more hallucination, that models not get it all right. You will see a lot of errors. You see a lot of risk, and ethics will come into the foreground. So then I do think we see a little bit of a dip after initial hype, and then we probably go through a next wave of more orchestrated AI and general intelligence. But I do think that is something that we go through waves, and I could expand on it why I believe in that. But I do think it's not all a straight line up or a hockey stick up. I do think we go through waves and learnings, and I think we're just coming into people now everybody's excited on that ChatGPT. I think in 3-6 months there will be more people be scared and worried about what it does, and then we think about security, protection, and ethics.
No, that's fantastic. So I think consolidation and recalibration to stabilize the use of AI, whereas perhaps it's getting a little ahead of itself at the moment. So over to you, Elliott. 30 seconds for your what's coming up next for AI.
Yeah, so Markus and John, everything they said, absolutely. I would add to that robotics. I don't think that we are ready. We sort of talked ourselves out of robotics, out of robots in our homes, but we're going to be shocked what they've been able to do with robotics and the integration of robotics in the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to see, general use robots in our world that we sort of thought it was never going to happen. I would just end with this. You have to go out and try these things. You have to go out and try ChatGPT or, Claude or Anthropic's tools, Meta, Llama, whatever. You got to try it because every child born after today will be born into a world where they talk to their machines, not type, not send a message, not go into code, but literally just have a conversation and ask the machine to do something for it. That's the world that that children are now being born into, and that's the way it's going to be. So you have to go out and play with this stuff. And I think the comment that John made before was great, which is, don't force yourself to use it to do something that someone showed you. Use it to fix a problem that you have. If you're going on a trip next month, go out and see what it can teach you about your trip next month. If you're trying to figure out why your apples aren't growing in your apple tree, look it up. It'll help you with the things that you have. That's how you'll learn. That's the future.
So I think that's a great final message. Thank you, Elliott. And the final message is really get in amongst it and do your experiments and identify how it can be useful in your specific use cases, and then take on all the great advice that we've had from all of our panelists to get the most effective outcomes. So thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. We will be sending out a link later on if you want to rewatch the webinar. And for now, that is all. Thank you.